Welcome to the Nook podcast. My name is Steven, and this is part 2 of Travis's story. If you haven't listened to part 1, I highly recommend going back one episode to catch up first. There's just a whole lot in this episode that won't make sense without that context. Travis went into the Marine Corps with every intention of making a long-term career of it. So when his injuries forced an early exit after just 5 years, adjusting to life back in the States didn't come easy. While he was very fortunate to have a job in the family business waiting for him, it was quickly obvious that adjusting to this unexpected new chapter in his old life, while dealing with so much physical and mental pain, would take a long time to get used to.
Well, when I got out, I was lucky. My parents had their own business, so I was able to jump right in there. However, I was taking oxys. I had morphine patches. I had all these drugs that they were giving to me left and right, and I was taking like candy. And I was still drinking and doing all that. So, I remember a couple times where I would just do dumb stuff like take 6 oxys and then go drive to my friend's house and then have some beers and more oxys and then drive home. At one point I was at 43 pills a day.
Enter Tabethlta, a girl Travis met shortly after coming home.
So we were just friends. I was actually friends with his brother, Mike, and his sister-in-law, Alicia. And that's how I kind of was introduced to the family. So when he came into town from Hawaii, I believe, we were all out at a restaurant bar type thing. There was dancing and dinner and stuff like that. And I just met him officially then, but I knew about him. I knew that he was in the Marines and that he was stationed in Hawaii. And we had just became friends through him coming back to Arizona and staying with his parents, living with his parents in Peoria for a little while. And we just all kind of hung out. So we were just hanging out with his brother, with his sister-in-law, with his other sister. And his whole family. We kind of got to know each other that way. So it was kind of a friendly environment. And then Travis and I started talking a little bit more often. And we were pretty inseparable after that.
The two were spending more and more time together. And the more that Tabethlta got to know Travis, the more she realized that he wasn't exactly checking all the boxes for her.
There was some things that I was like, oh, this isn't really what I was looking for initially. And because I got to know him as a friend first and got to see his heart and the things that he valued and cared about and loved for his country, the love for his family. Those were qualities that were important to me. It's funny because I would never date a guy that smoked. And I think I said something like that. And he was a smoker at the time, smoked cigarettes. And he quit cold turkey. We weren't even dating. He was just like, oh, you don't like people who smoke. I'm gonna quit smoking today. And he quit cold turkey, has never picked up a cigarette since then. And then we had started dating, and it was interesting because when we did start dating, I noticed that he was a really happy guy, over the top happy. He was just always in a good mood. And I thought that's bizarre. Nobody is in that good of a mood all the time. And I knew that he was taking medication through the VA to manage his pain and things like that. And at that time, initially, I didn't think that was the link to the two, him being so happy and in a good mood, and the medication that he was taking to kind of numb the pain that he was feeling. And that definitely changed. When we started officially dating, I noticed that he didn't need those things anymore. He was happy with the way life was going, and our relationship made him happy. But with the relationship making him happy, it also was almost a detox from the medication that he was taking. So there was a lot more mood, emotions that initially weren't there because he was feeling good. But then when he started to taper off of that medication, not needing it as much anymore, he just began to feel some of those feelings.
As the relationship grew deeper, Tabethlta started inviting Travis to church with her.
I think I had started talking to him about church when we were just friends. He's always said, I thought the church was going to catch fire when I walked in. I said, that's so cliche. Everybody that's unchurched says that, of course it's not going to catch a fire. And then eventually it got to us starting to date. And like the cigarette habit, he was so interested in spending time with me that if I didn't like the smoking, he was stopping the smoking. If I was going to church and he wanted to hang out with me, he was going to go to church. But there was some hesitancy in the beginning. So I think initially it was, I just want to spend time with this girl that I like. So I'm going to go to church with her and just let it be that. And I think that maybe that was his expectation, was I'm just going to go, I can sit next to her. We could go to dinner after work or whatever, and it not be a big deal. And I think he kind of downplayed it a little bit. But I noticed that after a few times, he started feeling like the pastor was penetrating his heart a little bit. He could tell that the words meant something to him, that were valuable to him. I think that just me being that support for him and not making it a big deal, hey, just come to church with me. It's cool. You can wear flip-flops. You can wear your baseball hat if you want to, and making it as no big deal and letting God do the rest, just getting his butt in the seat. Because like you said, that was something that was important to me. A Christian man, somebody that had that same type of mindset, that same value to Christianity as I did and what I grew up on. I wanted that to be something that we fostered our family. And I think that for him, the church was a new sense of camaraderie that he was missing. So I knew that it was just a matter of time before he was going to relate to that and see it for what it was, that communication with God in a different way than he'd ever experienced before, never having grown up in that environment or having gone to church before, very much before we started dating at all. So I don't think I was surprised. I think I was just excited that this man that I really cared about, that I was falling in love with initially, was willing to go to church with me. And then he related to it so quickly.
As you guys were getting closer in that time, was he open with you about some of what had gone on with him in Iraq and the various places that he was and the tough things that he had been through, or was he hesitant to share that stuff with you?
I think initially he was, and I didn't know much about what he had gone through, what his unit had gone through. That came out, I think, over a period of time, probably over the course of that year, kind of little by little. I think the hardest part for him was if I talk about it, I have to think about it. If I'm thinking about it, it makes me feel guilty, ashamed, angry, depressed. And those emotions were being suppressed by the medication that he was taking. So if he wasn't thinking about it, he didn't need to talk about it. And so I think that when he started to taper off the medication, it brought a lot of those emotions back, and he needed somebody to talk to about it. So he did talk to me about those things. And I remember going to, we were at my parents' house. We had a friend over, and this is when we were dating, probably 6 months in, I want to say. And my mom's friend's husband found out he was in the Marines and said, "So did you kill anybody?" And I was like, man, what a terrible question to ask somebody, first of all, and it was so nonchalant, like, I'm just curious. And he answered, but I could tell it bothered him. And we had a conversation after that too. But I mean, he's been asked that before. It wasn't the first time. I didn't want him to feel uncomfortable around, people that were in my life, but having that conversation with him brought out more of the situations that happened in Iraq. And I think gave him some peace. Like, you're not going to shock me with that information. I know that war is horrible. I know that you did everything that you should have done in that moment. No judgment from me. There's no judgment from God. It is what it was. It happened. It's done. It's over with. And if you want to talk about it, I'm here. If you don't want to talk about it, I'm okay with that too. I ever want to pressure him into feeling like he needed to release details about stuff, especially if it was requiring him to think about it himself. Because I noticed that when he talks about it, he has nightmares that same night usually. So it's just that subliminal thought process of, I'm having to dig up all these skeletons that I don't want to talk about, and now I've got to deal with them, and then it's on his mind constantly.
Friendship led to courtship, and ultimately Travis proposed to Tabetha in September of 2008. And so much of what he had been dealing with personally was set aside for the standard wedding preparations. Groomsmen and bridesmaids were chosen, a venue located, and a future was viewed through the rose-colored glasses that we all tend to get in those young, love-struck moments. Looking back on it now, Tabetha has a different perspective.
I don't know if some of that was just my own naive, young, in love girl that was not thinking about how serious the trauma was at the time, because I wish that I had been in that moment more prepared to help him through it, because I don't think that I knew exactly how to help him through it, and I don't think he knew how to be helped in those moments. I thought, my naive self thought that I was enough to wash all those traumas away, that our relationship made him so happy that none of that stuff bothered him. And it did for a while, but that's how trauma works. It's in waves, and it goes up and it comes down, and the things that may not have bothered him in that moment because he was distracted and we were in this really awesome honeymoon phase and things were going really good, and we didn't have to deal with life at the moment and sharing bills and buying a house and all the stresses that life has to come, right in the beginning of our marriage. That stuff was easy. So I think that I was ill-equipped, and I think he was too in the beginning, not really knowing how to deal with his trauma.
Travis and Tabetha were married in September of 2009, and their life together was pretty normal. 2 people, working all week, church with family on Saturday nights, and other fairly predictable items to fill the calendar. New issues would come into play a few years later when they wanted to start a family. Like so many couples deal with, natural means just weren't working. In their sadness and frustration, they chose to become foster parents. They would eventually adopt a young child who had come from an abusive environment, a new, unexpected wrinkle for their family.
I mean, going through the classes that we went through for foster care. So we did foster care classes to become foster parents. I had 5 miscarriages as that was happening. So there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression on my end that triggered his own depression, his own anxiety. And going to foster care classes, we talked a lot about trauma and how to cope with trauma, how to maneuver through trauma, and things like that kind of caused me to research more things, even with our son having come from a traumatic situation, learning how to adapt and teach and communicate and things of that nature were a slow process. But I think that the fact that we were in church and we made that a staple in our life every week, that it kind of evened his mood out long enough to heal. And there were, like I said, there were ups and downs. There were weeks where he did really great, and myself included. I mean, I have my own anxiety that goes up and down. So, and I'm not medicated for that. So I just beat it. Some days I'm doing good and some days I'm crazy. I don't know. But it just, with him, it's the same, you know? And sometimes if he's on a really moody day and I'm on a high anxiety day, we just try to do our own thing. But able to read him, and I mean, he'll have a nightmare and not say anything about it. He'll wake up the next day and I'll instantly know. Instantly. And I mean, just being able to read each other and know what he needs in those moments, and having learned that over time, just our young baby selves, not really realizing how all of that works, and then slowly being educated through the foster care process, through life. I mean, going into law enforcement and working with other veterans who struggled with depression, anxiety, trauma, that kind of stuff, and hearing how their stories played out has been eye-opening for me, that not every military veteran goes through the same traumas. Not all traumas are created equal, and you don't have to be in a war to have trauma. Everybody suffers from some level of trauma. So it's just, for us, it was just educating ourselves, being diligent about communicating with each other. We talk a lot. I probably overtalk the most of the time. He's pretty quiet. But we communicate, and that has really helped us.
Okay, so you are knocking on 12 years of marriage with Travis, and you've seen the good days, you've seen the really bad days, and maybe even stretching into bad seasons. What have you learned? Is there any way for you to kind of put a bracket on that and say, here's the 3 or 4 things that I know now that I would have never expected to 12 years ago?
You know, in the beginning, we were, again, so naive. We thought, well, never go to bed angry. Well, there's been plenty of times I've gone to bed pissed off. And him too. Right. Where you're just like, I just can't deal with you right now. And having this idea in the beginning that marriage is going to be so wonderful and it's going to be so easy. We're in love. Everything's great. We're never going to fight. We're never going to argue. We're always going to do this and we're always going to do that. I mean, I think that it was silly to think that. And yet, as we go through our marriage and we go through our life together and dealing with traumas of our own, with miscarriages and foster and, having a child who has come from a traumatic environment, things like that, and being able to get through them together, even with all of the seasons, the ups and the downs. But I think if we had gone into marriage knowing and believing that things were going to be difficult, we were going to have bad days, we were going to have bad months, we were going to have a bad year, whatever that may have been, and being able to go into it understanding more about trauma, I wish we would have learned that in the beginning rather than 5 years in, 6 years in, 10 years in. That was the biggest takeaway for me. And it's one of our family friends was at our shower, our bridal shower. And all of the people at the bridal shower put a note card. They wrote advice for the bride and groom. And they put it in a little jar. And I was supposed to take them out, read them, and pick my favorite. And the favorite of all of the note cards I would give a gift to of some kind. And she had been married at the time, I don't even know, long time, 50 plus years probably. And her biggest piece of advice on the card that I loved, and she was my favorite, was to pray for each other. And so many times I feel like when we were struggling in the beginning and I didn't know how to help, and I wasn't equipped in those moments, and I didn't know how to communicate, that praying was all I could do. And that was the only thing that calmed me, because it wasn't somebody arguing with me on the other end. It wasn't, and there wasn't an agenda. It was just, I know he's struggling right now. How can I help him? And show me ways to help him. Things like that. So that stuck with me throughout my years of marriage, as to when I don't have any other resource, when I don't have any other option. And even when I do, the praying was so helpful, because I knew that the only thing that could change the situation was God, and the only thing that could change Travis's heart, the way that he viewed the trauma, was God. And I just gave it to him and let him take care of it. And that's probably the biggest thing I learned in just 12 years. 12 years of marriage.
Gotcha. Well, and at the risk of asking a silly question, did you feel God's comfort in those times?
I did, because once I gave it to him, I stopped feeling the pressure of fixing it myself, because that's hard. Not knowing how to make him feel better, him not knowing how to make himself feel better, him dealing with life unmedicated, him dealing with physical pain unmedicated. It was a lot. And I was glad he was off of the medication that the military had fed him, the VA had fed him. But just praying for that peace where the situation was concerned helped in so many ways, and I could see it. Sometimes immediately, sometimes a few days later, where he would just snap out of a down mood and feel better and be excited to go to church, or excited to do something with the family, or, things like that. That's definitely something that's changed, and I'm really proud of him for.
Next time on The Nook. While marriage and family life offered some peace and stability, Travis still had so many internal battles to fight.
For me at the time, I wasn't processed. I didn't have time to process it. I went from Marines to work. I was able to bury a lot of stuff for a long time. It creeped up. You can only bury it for so long before it starts planting something else.
Sadly, in seeking help, the system failed him, and it sent him into a dark, downward spiral.
I opened all these wounds, and really, I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't want to leave Tab or Josiah. I just wanted the pain to go away. Like, mental, physical, I just wanted it gone.
If you or someone you know is contemplating hurting themselves or others, please call the National Suicide Hotline at 800-273-8255. Someone is available there 24 hours a day. And just in case no one has ever told you, you can call on God to help you. The Bible says to be strong and courageous, and that God will neither fail you nor abandon you. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you here next week for part 3 of this story in the Nook. The Nook is a production of Sozo Digital Media.